Hallo, gaat, and welcome back, my fellow language teachers, to Adventures in Language. I'm your guide, Emily. In this video, we're talking about one of the most well-researched yet underutilized learning principles, the spacing effect. What is it? Why does it matter? And what do you need to know about it in order to improve your students' retention in the target language? For those of you who might not know me yet, I'm Emily. I'm a linguist at Mango. I have my PhD in linguistics and a true passion for language teaching. Well, sin más demora, let's get to it. Okay, so as a teacher, you want your students to remember the content that you teach for more than just a unit, more than a semester, even beyond the school year. Yet, how often do you hear learners say, I took Spanish last year, but I don't remember almost any of it? That can be frustrating for everyone involved. The truth is that we tend to forget things that we don't use, and we remember things that we see multiple times. Enter the spacing effect. So, what is the spacing effect? It's the phenomenon by which memory retention of learning content increases when study or review sessions are spaced out as opposed to done in one sitting. So what that means is that every parent and teacher was right when they told students, study a little bit each day instead of cramming all at once. Over 100 years of research have clearly demonstrated that learning is more effective when exposure is spaced out over time, rather than done all in one sitting. When it comes to long-term retention, cramming for an exam is never as effective as studying regularly over the course of a semester. So with a little planning, we can leverage the benefits of this spacing effect to help our students retain the language for longer. Okay, now let's back up and think about what students are learning when they learn a language. An educated English speaker, for example, knows between 20 and 30,000 words, along with hundreds of idioms and multi-word expressions. And one reasonable estimate is that it takes roughly 2 hours a day for 5 years to get half of that for any language. That's a lot of information, so it's no wonder that forgetting is a natural part of the language learning process. Lucky for us, research into the spacing effect provides teachers with insight on how to reduce forgetting and increase retention. To that end, I found it helpful to think about language learning like building a sandcastle. You build the foundation, and then you get to all the fun details and towers, but if you don't regularly reinforce the base, the whole thing can start to crumble. And you can help your students reinforce their language base by introducing spaced repetition into your class structure. It's worth mentioning that spaced repetition is not specific just to language. Spaced repetition can help increase retention length for many kinds of academic areas, math, physics, and importantly for our purposes, language. And in some circumstances, spaced repetition relative to single study sessions of the same length have been shown to double a learner's retention rate. That's wild. Here's what you need to know to be able to talk about the spacing effect with your students. For example, what is the forgetting curve? How does spaced repetition compare to cramming? And what is the optimal study schedule that students should be using to retain the language content? Let's answer each of those questions in turn. Okay, first, we need to talk about the forgetting curve. This is a simple negative sloping curve by which learning content loses its retrieval strength and memory over time. It's educational psychology's way of saying use it or lose it. And spaced repetition flattens this curve, thereby maximizing retention. Thinking about student learning in terms of the forgetting curve is helpful to teachers in thinking about how we structure our lessons, but it's also helpful for students for getting them to set goals and stay motivated. Plus, some students are visual learners by nature, so seeing the retention loss and gain on a simple graph can be a really powerful rhetorical device to have in your back pocket when talking about the spacing effect and effective at-home study strategies. Okay, next point. What should you say to a student who says that cramming works for them? Well, first thing is, they might be right, but they're likely not seeing the whole picture. It's true that students can perform equally well on a test regardless of whether they study using spaced repetition or a singular late-night cram session. But the difference comes later. The student who uses spaced repetition to study will remember that information for longer after test day. It really becomes a conversation about the student's longer-term goals with the language. Do they want to be able to use the language after the course ends? Are they taking the next course level in the language curriculum? Because if Spanish 2 is coming up next semester, they don't really want to be starting from scratch. So in that case, they would of course be better off using spaced repetition as their study strategy. Oh, and if you'd like a fun and easy worksheet to help your students reflect on their language learning goals, then check out our free Setting Good Goals worksheet, which we've linked for you in the description down below. Okay, our last main point. How long should the gaps between study sessions be for optimal retention? Here's what we know. First, and this is the most important piece to remember, the gaps between study sessions should be shorter at first and then longer as time goes on. From there, it really all comes down to two things. First, how quickly does the student need to learn the information? Usually this translates to how far away is the test. And this is important because shorter gaps generally lead to faster acquisition of the content since more material is being presented in a shorter period of time. Now, the second important point is how long does the student want to retain the information? And usually this translates to how long after the test or after the course ends do they want to be able to use the language. And the reason this matters is that longer gaps between your study sessions lead to longer retention, at least up until a certain point. Spaced repetition schedules are generally created with days as the unit of measurement in order to capitalize on the role of memory consolidation during sleep. Now, let's imagine a student wants to prepare for a travel words themed vocabulary test that's coming up in 1 week. The student knows about the spacing effect. So rather than studying in one cram session, the student is going to use spaced repetition and break their study session into 2 study sessions that happen on 2 separate days. Now, the question becomes, what is the optimal gap for maximizing retention for a test that is a week away? The research is actually pretty clear on this. Given 2 study sessions, research suggests timing the study sessions to be spaced apart by about 2 days. Okay, now let's think bigger. What if the student wants to maximize the retention of those travel-related words for a year? Maybe that's when the AP test is, or maybe they have a trip abroad planned. Now, the optimal gap for maximizing retention for a year out requires sessions to be spaced apart by roughly 25 days on average. But remember, that's 25 days on average. For optimal results, the gaps between study sessions should be shorter at first and then longer as time goes on. So what this could mean is maybe after studying the vocab set for the first time, the student revisits it once every other day for a week, and then once a week for a month, and then once a month for a year. Oh, and side note, if you're a teacher who already uses the Mango Languages app with your students, then you already know that spaced repetition has been built into the app's review system. So when your students use the app, it tracks what words and grammar points they haven't seen in a while, and it reinforces them with practice opportunities that are automatically introduced based on our spaced repetition algorithm. Pretty nifty. If you'd like to learn more about the research that's been done on the role of spaced repetition in second language acquisition, then check out the suggested readings that we've linked for you in the description down below. Well, there you have it. You've made it to the end of the video. To recap, here are the talking points to keep in your back pocket when you're talking about the spacing effect with your students. Number 1, the forgetting curve. This is a simple negative sloping curve by which learning content loses its retrieval strength in the mind over time. It's educational psychology's way of saying use it or lose it. Number 2, the spacing effect is the phenomenon by which long-term memory retention improves when study or review sessions are spaced out as opposed to done all in one sitting. All right, and the last point is the study schedule for optimal retention incorporates using shorter gaps between study sessions up front, followed by longer gaps between study sessions later. And in practical terms, the 2 factors that ultimately help a student determine what the optimal study schedule for them is going to be are how far away is the test and how long after the test do they want to retain the information. Well, my fellow language teachers, that's all for this time on Adventures in Language. In our next video, I'll be sharing 5 fun and easy ways you can use spaced repetition in your class. And if you want to be the first to know when that video goes live, then come join the Mango fam by subscribing to the channel. As always, if you have a question or an idea for a video that you'd like to see from us, then let us know in the comments. We're always listening. Well, that's it for today. Dáág, and I look forward to hanging out with you here next time. Bye. I'm back. And I'm here to remind you to get your free language teacher goodies, which you can access through the link in the description. In the meantime, catch up on our existing videos, which you can access through the links here on the screen. See you next time on Adventures in Language. Bye.